Welcome to Crying Out Loud. I'm Dr. Laura Berman, and this is your grief companion. Join me to learn how to soften the pain, steady the nervous system, and connect to your loved ones on the other side. None of us were meant to grieve alone, so let's cry out loud together.
So I'm crying out loud, I'm not holding it in, I'm shrinking my heart.
Meghan Riordan Jarvis is a podcast host, TEDx speaker, trauma-trained psychotherapist, specializing in grief and loss with 20 years of experience. And she speaks to the importance of understanding grief and supporting grievers. She has had all of this experience, but really her world opened up in around 2017 when her mother passed, and she became the patient with post-traumatic stress disorder, struggling with many of the symptoms she'd been counseling clients through for so many years. She ended up putting herself inpatient where she had sent so many other clients and trauma survivors in her work. And she came out the other end to write a memoir, The End of the Hour. It's a memoir of trauma, loss, and healing. This latest book she's created is really cool. It's called Can Anyone Tell Me? Essential Questions About Grief and Loss. Just came out recently, and it's really cool because the whole book is comprised of all of these really common and crucial questions that most of us don't get the answers to, like, why do I have no memory? How come I can't move on? Why do I hate all my friends? You know, these common questions that we think no one else is experiencing, but in fact are pretty universal to grief. So we are getting into the ways that trauma and past trauma may play a role in the way you move through loss, whether it's loss through death or loss of a job or loss of a relationship. And what you can do, what you can understand about how the brain and body processes loss, and what you can do to move with that so that it helps you heal. That's what we're getting into in this episode. Meghan Riordan Jarvis, I am so excited to have you on The Language of Love.
You are such a saint to have me here. I am so grateful for this conversation, and we've only just begun it.
Yeah, we've only just begun and it's already fabulous. So your new book is Can Anyone Tell Me? And, you know, you and I have connected in recent months through, you know, our mutual friends and colleagues as two people who are navigating grief therapy and education. And you've been in this a lot longer than, I mean, I've always addressed grief, but that hasn't been the focus of my practice. You've been in this for a lot longer, both as a trauma therapist and on your own personal grief journey. So I want to talk about the book in particular, some things I found really interesting and important in my humble opinion about it. But I thought we could start just with your journey as, you know, a clinician, but also someone, it feels to me like, you know, well, I know you haven't always done this kind of work.
Yeah.
You've done trauma work for many, many years, but like me, and you probably came up against grief and dealt with grief as part of that practice.
Yeah.
But really the focus on grief started with your personal journey. So I'm wondering if we can talk about that and what brought you to start diving so deeply into grief.
You already gave a really great summary. I've been a trauma therapist for a little over 20 years. And, you know, sort of describing yourself as any kind of therapist really just is pointing the direction towards who is it that you're working with. And I think what distinguishes a trauma therapist or someone who specializes in trauma is that you're trained in treatment modalities. So it's not just shifting thought patterns. It's actually moving energy through the body. And so those kinds of treatment modalities are things like EMDR, which uses the optic nerve and bilateral stimulation to shift how the brain is formulating and maintaining memories. Sensory motor psychotherapy, which is like the energy that's inside your body that has sort of been residing there since you went through a traumatic event, figuring out ways, different tools and techniques to help that energy shift through the body. And when I'm talking about energy, what I really mean is emotions. So emotions are those little electrical currents that run through the body. We turn them into feelings when we end up being able to sort of identify words. The reason I became a trauma therapist is that when I was in my early 20s, I went through, I think, what people would describe as like a standard everyday breakup. But I am not joking, Laura. My experience with this breakup was like it was the world was ending. There was no safe place to hide. I couldn't really understand why people didn't look at me as though I had just been, torn apart by a leopard. That's what it felt like. And I was in my early 20s. I was new to Washington and I had a new group of friends. And I was starting to have that experience where like you're talking about something and people are stopping making eye contact and they're kind of looking over your shoulder and
Their
they
eyes are glazing over.
they're bored of what you're talking about. And I'm like, how can you be bored? I'm not even like
I'm
remote.
devastated.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think every griever will tell you that they know the brutality of that experience. And I
Yes.
think what it does to us in general often is it creates isolation. We just understand that like how we feel and the depth of how we feel it and the intensity and the perpetuity of it is not welcome. So I didn't look at those friends and think you guys are jerks. I just was like, oh, I'm going to destroy these friendships, these burgeoning friendships, if I don't figure out another way to be in these feelings and process these feelings. So that was, a colleague slipped me the name of her therapist when I was crying yet again in the bathroom and I went into therapy and it was my first time walking in. I had all the experiences that so many other people do. Like I thought I should keep it private. I wasn't going to tell my parents. I wasn't even sure I believed in it. And I went in and I cried for 46 minutes straight, and just told this lovely woman how, this was the worst breakup anyone had ever had. We got to the end of the session and she just said, hey, just out of curiosity, did anything bad ever happen in your childhood? Right. And I'm like, lady, were you listening? This is all about the love that's been lost and a broken heart. And I actually answered and said, no. I was like, no, I had a great childhood. Walked out, went back to my job, was going to sleep that night and was like, well, that teenager that we sort of considered a family member did drown while my entire extended family was on the beach and didn't notice. And then we never talked about that again because it was during the summer and we left that summer community and went back to our normal community and nobody knew there. So no one ever talked to me about it. In fact, I've never talked about it ever to anyone. I wonder if that's what she means.
Maybe.
Right. And so then I got into therapy and was like, oh, therapy is not what it looks like on TV. She was really educating me. Like, oh, listen, you have all the hallmarks of a person who has lived with unresolved trauma. And I was like, what are you saying to me? Like, what? It's like she had found a mass in my colon or something. You know what I mean? I was like, what are you talking about? So she really educated me, really gave me information, books to read about what happens when something that overwhelms our system is too scary for us to process, is too much. And I was 9 when this happened. Really the meaning that it ends up creating inside your system.
That you're
So
not even aware of, and
that you're not at all. I
yeah.
had all of these sort of stories about how like I was kind of a weird kid. And you know what? It is really weird at 9 to know that children die. That is weird for kids.
Yeah.
So like I had a really intense, hard experience that did separate me from my peers. But the way that I thought I was separated from my peers was like I was chubbier than they were, or I didn't shop at the same stores that they did. Like I was 9, I was 10. I
Yeah.
was trying to come up with an explanation that was above my capacity.
That could explain your sense of
Yeah.
isolation and difference. Yeah. I felt that a lot as a kid too, mostly because, and I think a lot of kids feel this way when there's a
Yeah.
lot of trauma or abuse or difficulties or experiences that they're having that either they don't know is strange, because
Right.
that's just their reality and they don't
That's right.
realize till much later that it's
That's
not
right.
okay that your father was doing this, or it's not okay that this happened, or this isn't normal to never talk about the poor child who drowned
That's
in
right.
front of you. But also I talk a lot about how, you know, grief loves an open door. So when you're, when you're grieving anything, even if you're sad, for something happening to some other family,
That's right.
all your other griefs will come, it's like your system is like, woohoo,
Yeah.
the door is open, let's bring it all out. And the same thing is true for trauma. I find trauma loves an open door too. So what I think you're saying is that where a lot of people might go through a breakup and be really sad, go through a period of like, curling up into a ball or going into a puddle, but like they'd eventually, pick themselves up, shake themselves off and move on. When you've had unresolved trauma,
Yeah, I couldn't do that.
yeah,
I
the
couldn't.
trauma of the breakup just triggers, it's that open door.
That's right. And I could sort of see that, right? Like I had enough sort of metacognition to be like, damn, I'm taking this really hard. I've seen
Yeah.
other people go through breakups and like they're dating somebody 2 weeks later. Like, what is going on here? Right.
Yeah.
So sort of fast forward, I fell in love with therapy. I went back to school. I became a therapist. Every training I could possibly get my hands on, I did those trainings, whether they were 5 years long or I had to wait on a waiting list. The harder it was, the more challenging it was. The more exciting that was. And I was working with really um, clients who were really motivated and making profound change. So it was just so totally rewarding. And I don't think I realized this at the time, but I did so much of my own grief work. I went back and processed this grief work from my childhood, other losses, because grief really is the energy that's created on account of loss. And that means all the losses, when my brother went to boarding school and I wasn't ready for him to leave the home, like that's a loss. So I did exactly what you're talking about, all the things that were kind of clustered together that all popped up on account of the loss of this relationship. I was like, I was cleaning the closet, like, oh, let's look at that. Let's look at that. And I really felt pretty smug. I was like, I'm trained in all the things. I have done all my work, right? Therapists love to talk
I'm
about
all better.
done the work.
Yeah.
I not only did I think I was all better, I also thought like, and I'm inoculated from anything bad happening to me because I know all the tools.
Yeah.
Never, ever tempt the universe with that sort of a sentence. So in 2017, my dad died after a year-long diagnosis with small cell cancer. So I pretty much knew from the moment he was diagnosed that he had about a year to live. And the way that I describe it is I participated in his death. He was dying. I went to his house from my house, on the weekends, saw him. My brain took in the fact that he was getting, he was less physically able. His body was shrinking. He was, he looked less well. I was just sort of like participating in the loss of my dad. And when he died, it was very sad and it was hard. But it didn't really knock me off my horse. It was like I was on this life path and this hard thing happened. And maybe I
You were
jumped off.
prepared for it because
I mean, it was what I think we think of when we think of sort of, a typical developmental grief experience. Your parents are meant to die before you. My dad was 80 when he died. He died of something that they tried to treat it. It didn't work. And I was like, look at me grieving. Look at me doing the things. This is what I've learned to do. This is what I teach other people to do. And then in 2019, my mom died suddenly while I was on vacation with her. And that was like the world, you're nodding, the world split open and I was not the same and have never been the same. And I immediately experienced what I knew to be PTSD symptoms, meaning like, oh, this is not just about this moment. This is about still some residual trauma that's inside my body. But primarily what I experienced was this profound sense. And it actually showed up as a sentence that I could hear in a voice that was not my own that said, it's your fault that she died. So even though I still had enough of my personality intact to be like, it's obviously not your fault that your mother died of whatever this illness is, I also 100% believed that it was. Well, I know enough about ruminations as a symptom to know, there's a lot of symptoms that grievers come in with. They're not sleeping and they're not eating and they have brain fog and memory loss. Ruminations are ones that really are a flag for me because I know that what they do is they invade your present with this sense of sort of guilt and culpability. And they also tend to sort of predict calamity in the future, which means not only are they making you unwell in the present, they are also really limiting the possibility of goodness in the future. And so I knew when I had these ruminations that went from being like once or twice a day to like once or twice a minute that I was really in trouble. And I ended up having to check myself into the same inpatient facility that I had sent all of my hardest client, the clients that really needed more intense treatment. And when I came out of inpatient, I came out with just this like white hot fury of like, we are not telling the truth. We are not telling the truth. I hadn't embodied this kind of profound loss before, but I had worked with so many people who had. I think I did good work with them,
Yeah.
but I had different, experience is the teacher. And I got out and I was like, God, we tell so many lies
Yeah.
to grievers. We gaslight them. They feel like they're failing because they've had no education and there's no safe place to have a conversation with anyone about the truth of it. We don't teach them about their symptoms. Imagine if we never taught a child that was going to go through puberty about the puberty symptoms.
Yeah.
They would think they were dying when their
Well,
voice.
that's what happened in our grandmother's generation. They did. I mean, I
Exactly.
remember my grandmother telling me that when she got her period, she literally thought she was dying because
Yeah,
nobody
right.
educated her. But I just want to pause for a minute because, everything you're saying, I 100% agree with. But I just want to also highlight that, it's funny. It reminds me of David Kessler once telling me that after he'd been a grief educator
Yeah.
and counselor for many years
Son
when
died, yeah.
his son died. And he often says, I wanted to go back and call every client and say, I'm
Apologize.
sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
understand,
Yes.
even though his mother had died and he'd been through grief. So I want to ask you, just so I understand your experience, because, when your dad passed, it was, like you said, sort of more of the typical process, and you had time to process and you were prepared for it. What was it? Was it the suddenness of your mother dying? I mean, maybe there doesn't have to
Yeah.
be a why, but
No,
what
that's a good
was it
question.
about your mother's death that you think triggered that PTSD cascade that happened?
God, that's such a good question. And I've talked about this book a lot. Nobody has asked me that question. And I do think I have an answer, and it might be, it might be an unsatisfying answer. But I think when my dad died, I think in my childhood, what I had learned in my therapy was that I had become pretty codependent with my mom. She was
Yeah.
really impacted by this teenager's death. She was there when they pulled his body out of the water. It was my older brother who found him in the water. And I now understand, because she and I talked about it, and I know she would be fine with me sharing it, that she had PTSD, that she ran that ticker of those images of going down to the beach, seeing Chris's body come out of the water for about a year. And she really suffered during that year. And I didn't know what was going on, but I knew she wasn't okay. And so I developed a really, like, maybe even one way, like, I'm not even sure she was well enough to see what I was doing, codependent relationship. I was doing things to take care of my mother and look out for my mother in that little 9-year-old way, like putting kids' shoes at the door, washing dishes, things that likely she
Yeah.
wouldn't have even noticed because she had 6 kids and a million things going
But
on.
you took responsibility for her well-being.
Yeah, and
Because
my
you
own
were all
therapist was
this.
sort of like, well, and kids can't do that, and if you had stopped doing it, it would have been fine. And I got to tell you, even at 50, I do think I was really actually helping my mom. I do think
Yeah.
she was just about to go under some of that time. I think there were too many kids and too much being asked of her, and I think she was really unwell.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think what happened is when my dad died, I slipped back into a codependent relationship with my mom without noticing. I don't think I realized I was doing it, but I was calling to check up on her. I was visiting to make sure she was okay. I was, she needed to buy a new like dishwasher and a refrigerator because all your appliances always break all at once, and that was really overwhelming to her, and I was encouraging her and doing research with her. I was helping. I was helping in a way that I hadn't helped her in decades. And then she died. And I think I had put back on this apron of, I don't look out at the world from my own perspective. I look to my mom first. And so when she died, it felt like Like I was on this vacation with her when she died that really was for her because she had made a comment that she didn't expect to do any more traveling since my dad died. My mom was only 75.
Yeah.
And I was like, what if we do something small? And we ended up taking this trip to Maine. But I didn't notice that I was doing it because it didn't make me feel bad the way that it had when I was a kid, but I was doing it. And then when she died, really what it felt like was I had no idea who I was. And I would say that out loud to like my sister or my best friend or my husband
Who
or
am I if I'm not my mother's caretaker? Yeah, there was a part of
just
me that really
or who am I if I'm not my parents' daughter? And they would reflect things back like you're your children's mother or you are your client. But it felt like my mother was the center pole inside the tent and she
yeah.
fell down and everything was in darkness. And it was terrifying and really a secondary kind of like pain because a lot of my childhood I had felt lonely and I had felt other and
Yeah.
unhappy. And then through my therapy, I'm happy all the time. I love my life. I love the people who are in my life. I live very deliberately and intentionally. And all the lights went out. All of them went out. And I think I had worked with clients for decades who had been telling me that. And what it felt like was the equivalent of like reading and studying about France
Yeah.
and them being like fresh pastries and whole milk cream and then you go and you're like, "Oh my God, salted butter on a baguette is, the five senses experience of it is totally different."
Yeah.
And when I came out of treatment, I was like, I think I can tell more of the truth from the perspective of someone who educates in trauma. I think I can take some of the language that we talk about as a trauma therapist, because for trauma therapists, our job is to find out what was the terrible event. Was it a single event or were you sort of developmentally not supported enough as a child? And then how do we take the tattoo of that meaning and push it through so that you don't have to live with the understanding that that limitation of that event has hindered your life? How can we help you move that through? And the reality is when we're in the world of grief and loss, there's a precipitating event. The death of my mother, the death of your son, those are the precipitating events. But we still have the job of becoming people who have to figure out how to move that energy through the body. So I got out and was like, I just feel like I need to write this down. Well, first I read 188 books on grief and loss to see if anybody, because I was not trying to write a book, Laura. That was not what I was trying to do. And I just thought, let's see
And
if
what
somebody
was
else.
missing? What was missing from all the
I
books
really
you've written?
think, I mean, there are some folks who do this. Mary Frances O'Connor, who wrote The Grieving Brain, is a genius in this space, but she is also not a clinician. So there's still
Yeah.
some ways that I interpret. But I really think there's a lot of noise about how grief is personal and grief is specific. And we can't, it's too individual and it's too personal, and each person has to do it on their own. And that is true. But also, we grieve with our bodies.
Yeah, there's a common denominator of
And we can talk
experience.
about bodies. We can teach about bodies. I
Yeah.
mean, the number of clients that I saw that were coming in after having memory loss and brain fog for
Yeah.
upwards of a year, not sleeping for a year, having gotten divorced because their spouse was like, "I don't know who you are since your dad died," lost jobs, irritable, angry, started drinking, just so many things.
Yeah.
One, because
Cope with.
to cope with, and they were and
Yeah.
they were telling themselves the story that they were just doing really badly
Yeah.
at grief and loss.
Yeah.
And so it was like double, they were shaming themselves for having a hard time with something that is next to impossible that they've had no education on.
Yeah. I always say, like, take that shitter and shove it up someone's
Yeah.
ass because there's so many. We get really, I hear that all the time. I should be doing better. I should be grateful. I should not
Yeah.
be having such a hard time 3 years out. And I'm like, fuck
Like
that.
who
There is no
who
shit.
fucking says? Who
I don't.
says?
I don't know. The people around who are uncomfortable with it. But so the new book is Can Anyone Tell Me? And
Yes.
it's a series of questions, the most common questions that come up in your clients and the people that I work with around, loss and grief.
Yes.
And So it's questions like, why does my brain feel broken? Why does my body feel out of whack? Why am I so angry? Which we got to talk about. You
Yep.
know, what's happening in my relationships, right? Like all of a sudden you're not capable of small talk anymore. There are people that, you no longer are interested in the same things as the people that you maybe had in your life before. There's, people who were your ride or die end up totally not showing up for you. And then people who were not even in your inner circle end up being
Yeah.
your ride or die. There's so many shifts
So
that
wild.
happen.
Yeah, that's right.
So each chapter is like another question, and then you get into the answer. And I want to dive into some of those questions, but you mentioned this earlier, so I want to unpack this a little bit too. Is that a lot of the themes, a couple of themes that just kept coming up in different ways in the different chapters, and you alluded to this as part of your focus, is the unique things that happen to the brain and to the body that are pretty universal when there's
Yes,
been an extreme loss. And how it manifests is obviously unique to each person, and a lot of it has to do with how much unresolved trauma you have that may be coming
right.
back up, and there are all these different variables and how sensitive you are and what your thresholds are and all of those things.
That's
So
right.
we're not generalizing to everyone here, but I do think this piece is not talked about enough. And you're kind of a science geek like I am. So let's dive into that part
Yeah.
around your brain and body on grief.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. And the 12-year-old me always laughs because I barely passed sciences. And the idea yesterday, somebody was like, well, she has a specialty in neuroscience. And I was like, oh my God, that
Boy,
12 year
would
old
my
right
fifth
now is
grade teacher laugh at that,
yeah,
right?
losing her mind. Yeah, so essentially, what I would think I would say about this is there are some people that have had real terror in their lives. They were in a car accident, they were mugged, and so when we talk about trauma, that's where they go in their mind. Like, oh,
Yeah.
when that terrifying thing happened. And for some trauma therapists, they define trauma in a concrete way, saying, when you feared for your life. I don't define trauma that way. I think trauma actually is just something that's overwhelming to the central nervous system. So it has more energy in it that you can process in the moment. And so it activates your fight, flight, and freeze responses, which are your instinctive responses that the body uses essentially to protect you. And we've been using them since, the dawn of the age of man.
Right.
And they're very crude, and they're located in the very back of your brain, which we call the reptilian brain. And it doesn't have a lot of functioning. It sort of can code information as like 0 being neutral and 1 being threat. That's kind of all it can do. And so when you get a phone call that your dad died, or when a doctor tells you that your child has cancer, it it lands in your system, in your brain as the ultimate threat because
Mhm.
it's talking about death, which is the ultimate, it's the highest level. When it's a bear that runs into your office and you go into a fight, flight, freeze reaction, you can run away from the bear. That's what, so fight the bear, run away from the bear. That's what we're hoping we'll be able to do. And then you get safe. The problem with death is
Yeah.
you don't get to get
There's
safe.
nowhere to run.
There's no fighting, there's no run. Yeah, exactly. So we most often end up in a sort of a freeze state. And fight, flight, and freeze are actually progressive. So we always fight first, then we flee, then we freeze. Every time I teach this, somebody raises their hand and says, no, Megan, I never fight. That was conditioned. If you don't fight, it's because you learned it didn't work and you
Right.
skip it and you go. But as instincts inside our brain, we fight, flight, freeze. Freeze is a different part of our system. Fight and flight are the active part of the brain, and freeze is the parasympathetic nervous system, the calming part of our brain. And we go into freeze when we just want it to end.
Yeah.
That's how we survive
I
a
call
lot.
that immobilized, right? Like
Exactly.
that's
Right.
free.
And there's high freeze and there's collapse freeze. We don't need to go into all the little details of it. But what we do know is people are more susceptible to becoming traumatized when they are in freeze without support. So when you couldn't fight and you couldn't flee and you got stuck and you were right there and nobody helped you and your central nervous system took on the energy like being pummeled by waves. And what happens is, the amygdala, those tiny little almond-shaped things in the back of the brain that activate the fight, flight, and freeze, that process, when the limbic brain is lit up, is it swells, those amygdalas swell, and they cut off the communication, the actual sort of messaging that goes from the base of the brain to our prefrontal cortex, which is where our thinking happens, which is at our forehead. So the way that I always say it is like in a trauma, it's as though your brain has a little mailman that is doing his mail route all day long. The trauma happens, and the bridge that he takes with the little messages, the little electrical currents to all the normal parts of the brain, the bridge gets swept out and he can't do it. He can't get to the mailboxes. So he's kind of like throwing the mail in these little electrical
Hoping it
currents,
lands.
hoping it gets in the general. So what people experience is their hippocampus, which is responsible for formulating memory, isn't getting the electrical circuitry that it would normally get. So you are not formulating memory properly. Or your hypothalamus, which tells you that you're hungry, or it tells you that you're overly hot. It does a whole bunch of internal body regulations. That isn't getting the right mail. And so suddenly you're not getting hunger cues, or you're feeling overly hungry, or you're sweating all the time. And so these are totally normal responses, but because we don't talk about them, people think, oh my God, I probably have cancer because I'm having all these strange biophysical reactions. The most important thing about knowing that these things happen, the brain fog, which is a direct result, right? To some of this, it's a tool that our brain uses to sort of navigate the fact that we don't have the electrical currency working. And it's a tool that helps us not formulate really painful memories during this time, and also maybe not stay in a conversation that's too overwhelming. But people who have brain fog that have never had brain fog before, because this is the first trauma they've ever been in, it is freaking terrifying. And they feel like they're going crazy. It's important for us to teach about it because there are things we can do to help regulate it. That's the most important piece. Is I'm not trying to take anyone's grief away. You can't do that.
No.
But the way in which that grief dysregulates the system, also, we can't really stop that necessarily from happening, but we can create some resilience and some recovery so that you get your central nervous system sort of back to a neutral faster, or maybe not neutral, but like not at an 8, maybe at a 4. And that's what I define as grief work. Creating a grief practice so that we can show up for those inevitable physical responses, because what ends up happening is people will be, not sleeping, not eating, have brain fog, memory loss, difficulty with multi-stepped instructions for upwards of a year. And now all we're doing is talking about the symptoms, and we're going
I
to
feel like
doctor,
that was,
doctor,
like,
doctor.
more than a year with me.
Yeah, upwards of a year. So
Yeah.
what typically happens, me too. So I'm 5 years out of my mom's.
I feel like my brain is just now,
Yeah.
3.5 years out, starting to come back online.
But I can't wait to see what we talk about in a year from now, because I would tell you every year that goes by, I'm like, wow, I was still not really well. And I thought I was doing okay. Like I was still, when I look back at my memoir, when I read my memoir, I'm like, man, I was not well in some of these chapters.
Well, so I want to get into things you can do for resilience and recovery, but I do want to highlight, because when we talk about the uniqueness, there are these standard things that happen, but like those symptoms you're talking about, the brain fog, the freezing, the isolation, the, exhaustion, the lack of hunger. Is it worse? Do you find that it's worse in people who have compounded trauma, meaning
Yes.
they've had a lot of trauma already in their lives? Like I have definitely, I can see when I meet someone and I meet a lot of grievers and work with a lot of grievers now, like I can automatically see by how they're doing to an extent. I was like, oh, this one has had a lot of trauma.
Yeah. And I think this is actually, one of my bones to pick sort of with the field of grief and loss is, there's some percentages that are out there about who is it that has more trauma around their loss and therefore is probably going to need treatment. And the percentage is really low. It's like less than 10%. And that has never been my experience. It hasn't been my personal experience. It hasn't been my professional experience. And, it's based on people sort of asking, like, did you need more help? Well, that's like asking me if I wanted pineapple juice when I didn't even know that pineapple juice existed.
Yeah.
So saying, could I have used more help? If I don't know what the help looks like, I'm probably going to say no because I didn't even know what was
Yeah.
possible.
And I'm okay now,
Yeah, and
so
again, I think I would have told you I'm okay now and I wasn't as okay as I am now. So, it's all kind of like in perspective wise. But yes, I really do think that there are people that still have energy inside their system. And the way we talk about it is the window of tolerance,
yeah.
meaning like how much you can take on before you get overwhelmed, is pretty small. And so I do think people who have more trauma in their system that has been unresolved, of which I would put myself in that category, do have a harder time with whatever it is they are being presented with in the present. I do. And I think it's important for people to be aware. One way to look at that is ACEs scores. So you go and you look up the ACEs scores, which is Kaiser Permanente. You can go look it up online. And it says when you've had these past experiences, you are more susceptible to trauma, any kind of trauma
Yeah.
in your adult life. And I just think that's a good thing to know. I
Yeah,
think it's
it's
an
a really good
important
thing to know.
because that actually helps us if we were to screen people with ACEs when they came into all of the places that we see people. So every kind of doctor or community or church or whatever environment, if we were to screen them, then we would know who we should be really looking towards first, who might need help when we
Yeah, I
have these
forget what it stands for,
difficult events.
ACEs. Do you remember?
Adverse childhood
Yeah,
experiences.
okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, all right. So for someone listening, obviously this isn't going to be, this is to sort of give some guidance and open your eyes, guys, to the ideas that we're talking about here, because there isn't one of us who hasn't experienced a loss, maybe not like the death of a child, but it doesn't matter because like Megan was saying, it could be a breakup. And if you are really struggling with that breakup, that doesn't mean that something is quote unquote wrong with you. So I'm hoping that if you're listening to this, you're getting a sense of like, oh, like a little light bulb maybe going off, both maybe for you or for someone you love or care about or know, that this idea of compounded trauma of and also just to understand the grievers in your life and be able to support them whether you're a griever or not. But let's talk about this idea of resilience and recovery and maybe a couple of things that do work to help support the brain and body
Yeah.
through grief.
So, and I want to be really clear because I think grief is sacred and I think grief is lifelong. And I think it doesn't always hurt in the same way, but I think it is a definitive characteristic of who you are forever and ever. So when I'm talking about recovery, I'm talking about central nervous system
Yeah,
recovery.
like the
I'm not talking about
extreme
recovery
pain,
like, oh,
unable
you're
to
over.
function.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and resilience, it's one of those words that like, I sort of hate it sometimes because we're always looking to people who have, there's 90 people, 85 of them, didn't make it. And we're looking to the 5 that somehow survived and saying like, what is it that you have about you that you were able to survive, instead of maybe looking and being like, what did the 85 need that they didn't get that would have
Yeah.
helped them survive? So I like to define resilience as just like how quickly you're able to recover, how
Yeah.
quickly you're able to get back into a state of connection with your energy so that you're not overwhelmed. And there are, so I do distinguish early grief from sort of grief over time. And when I say I distinguish it by you tell me what your symptoms are. And then I'll tell you, those sound like early grief symptoms. You could be in early grief symptoms 15 years after your
Yeah.
mother died, right? So I'm not here to talk about a timeline or any of those things. I'm saying almost like immature grief symptoms, meaning they haven't had a lot of time to develop. And those are the ones that I think are the most physical and can be the most ruminative in your mind.
You're
And
ruminating and really anxious and
well,
isolating
you're
and
just,
yeah.
like 23 to 24 hours of the day, you're thinking about your loss and you're experiencing your loss. I mean, everybody who's had profound loss knows what that is. And
Yeah.
then over time, you learn to carry it and it's less dysregulating. And so it's still a part of your day. There are still days where it takes up your whole day.
Yeah.
But it isn't, you also have some periods of time where you are living forward with your loss instead of just living in the experience of your loss.
Yes.
So when you're in the experience of your loss, which I say is similar to you were thrown out of the boat, right? You fell off the cruise ship and now you're trying not to drown.
Mhm.
That really what we're trying to do is get you to the shore and dry it off. We're not trying to talk to you about your stroke and whether or not you're a good swimmer and like whether or not you were hanging over the railing. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to keep you alive. And so the regulation tools that we use here are really simple. They're like what you use with a baby. So one is we make sure that you are fed, that you have some macronutrients inside your system that your body needs, like including protein and fat and carbs. That's what macronutrients are. No, so you're not just eating banana bread every day, which is what I did when my dad died.
Yeah.
I just ate banana bread. I couldn't palate protein, but if I had really understood how important the amino acids are in protein, and we need to get them from food to create some of the soothing elements that your body then generates in order to put you to sleep and in order for you to feel back in regulation. I swear if I had understood that as well as I do now, I would have
You would
eaten
have forced yourself
I
to
would have
eat.
eaten some turkey. I would have
Yeah.
done it, right?
Yeah.
So there's the making sure that you are eating food that has nutrients. You can still eat banana bread. You just also have to have food that has nutrients, that you are able to get some movement into your body. Again, when my mom died, I sat on my porch swing for like a month because I don't think I fully understood that the movement is actually shifting the energy through your body. And everybody knows this when you're in a bad mood and you go for a run or you go dancing and your mood shifts. That's
Yeah.
because that energy that was part of your emotions has shifted through your system. And we have to do that in grief because it's going to come back. And
Which
so
is
it's
the
like
irony, because the
sailing the
last
ship.
thing you feel like doing, it
Yeah.
like you just become immobilized, but it's
Yeah.
so true. I mean,
But you have to do it, right?
you
Like
have to. Yeah.
it's the worst thing in the world, these profound losses. And the idea that we're asking grievers to do anything other than exactly what they want to do is totally unfair, except we are responsible for our health, mental health
Yeah.
and physical health. So walking, so I always say just walk around your block, walk for 10 minutes, walk for 3 minutes, walk for 1 minute, just 2% more than whatever movement you're doing today. And if you can add a friend in real life, that also brings connection in, right? Which is how we break through some of that isolation. Even if that friend is walking behind you and not talking to you, even if you just have them on the phone and because you can't tolerate being with someone else, still to have some element of connection is like an awesome extra credit. And I say to people who are supporting grievers, offer to take them for a walk, offer to take them in a car and then walk them to the lake and then walk them back from the lake and then go back. Something where they get outside and they get a little bit of movement in their body is really incredibly important. So those connection,
Food and
nourishment,
movement.
and movement is where I always start. And those are, once you are able to do a little bit of movement and folks do that, they go into the grocery store and they get triggered because they see their grandson's favorite cereal. And now they're sobbing in the grocery store, which is like the most common thing I hear all the
Mhm.
time. The grocery store is just
Been
laden with
there.
triggers. Right? We've all had it. Also being able to, we get on board other things that help right in that moment, which is like some breath work techniques, some cross boxing or movement that goes across the meridian line, which we know helps balance the energy across the two different systems inside the brain.
And so there's a lot at the end of each chapter. You have recommendations of things you can do. One of the things you touched on that I found really interesting, because I was not this way. My mother's death, I was extremely codependent with my mother. She was my
Mm,
soulmate. She died about 11 years before Sammy. And that was like my worst, most impossible death, possible loss. Um, I moved through it okay. I ended up with breast cancer mostly, I think, because it was sort of grief I wasn't processing, at least in my case. That's not to say you get cancer if you don't process your grief, but in my case, I feel like it was connected and caused just my inability to be with it, caused a lot of inflammation. But what I
yeah.
noticed after Sammy's death, which was really different for me, this piece, I mean, a lot was really different, but this
Yeah,
piece
of
is
course.
that I absolutely could not and would not talk to anyone.
Oh,
I
me. Oh,
talked to
yeah.
my husband and my son, but like my nearest and dearest were like, let me come over. They wanted to talk on the phone. I was like, no freaking way. No. Like I could not, I refused to see anyone, to speak to anyone. I literally felt like I was physically and emotionally incapable of it. And they would come and just like leave a coffee on my porch or, just like whatever, because hoping that I would maybe open the door. But for probably a month at
Yeah.
least, if not longer, I would
Oh,
not
yeah.
speak to anyone. What is that about? Because that is
Well,
not me.
I
I'll speak
really,
all day long.
I really relate to that, and I don't know, but I will tell you. So I had a very similar experience, although I was super sneaky. So people would be like, "Can I come over?" And I would say yes, and then I would cancel. So
Oh, I
people
would just
didn't
say no.
People didn't notice. I mean, I knew what I was doing. They didn't notice because I would be like, "Oh, I woke up with a headache." I knew the moment they said, "Let me take you to lunch," I
Yeah.
was not going to lunch with
Yeah.
them, that they were not going to see me. But they a little bit sort of thought like they had a plan with me because I made
Yeah.
it sound like it was maybe
Yeah.
going to happen. So I do think I hid a little bit more. But so I can only answer this question for myself. And I do talk a lot about this, and I talk a lot about how I hated everyone, how I was just like angry at everyone and angry, angry, angry the whole time. And I'm not a particularly angry person, so that was a little bit scary to me. But my problem was, I still had all my limbs.
Yeah.
Like, even though I wasn't eating, I didn't like drop 70 pounds. Even though I wasn't sleeping, I didn't have like giant bags under my eyes. I vaguely resembled the person that they knew. And
Yeah.
I was not the person that they knew. I wrote about this a lot in End of the Hour, my memoir, which was like, I couldn't fucking tolerate people looking at me with the same old face
Yeah.
as if they knew me when I was nothing like the person that they knew. And the
That's
only, it just made me want to light myself on fire. It made me hate them. It made me feel terrified inside my own skin when people would be like, "Yeah, I get it." And I'm like, "You don't get it. You've never even met me before." And the only time, Laura, so my youngest son, who is a giant, he was 10 pounds when he was born, was invited to like be on a soccer team that was, I don't know, 2 grades older and one town over. And in September, and my husband was like, "Oh, I don't think we can do it. My mom had died in August. It was like too much." And I was like, "Nope, I will take him to these soccer practices," because I didn't know a soul there.
yeah.
And not a single person looked at me like they knew
And
me
there
from,
were no expectations.
and
Yeah.
they didn't know what happened over the summer. And so people would be like, "Oh, you have a nice tan. Did you have a good summer?" I'm like, "Yeah, I wrote a lot. I read a lot of books." Because I couldn't be anything. I couldn't be anything that
Yeah.
made
You
sense. So
felt
I
like
might as well be
every,
a liar. I just
yeah.
like lied. And then actually the jig was up at some point. Either my son told someone or the coach knew somebody, and I could just see on his face, like, oh, he was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, she's the woman that's really struggling." And I was like, shit, it's broken. This like
Yeah.
imaginary world that
Right. Oh.
I don't know if that resonates with you, but that was,
Yeah, no, it was partially true. I will say that it felt like, and I said this to everyone at the time, especially my husband, I was like, every cell in my body has changed. I don't know what I'm becoming or who I'm going to be on the other side of this, but I'm not going to be the same person. So, I hope you like her. We'll
yeah,
see
I
who
hope it
she
works
is.
out. I hope it works. I mean, I had
But
so much anger. I was terrified that like I was going to be angry forever.
yeah,
And
well, let's talk about that because that was one of the things I wanted to ask you about too. Because I think as women in particular, I think it's real. We're not usually accustomed to anger. We have a lot of trauma around anger. We weren't allowed to be angry. Nice girls don't get angry. Blah blah blah. No one likes an angry woman. So we don't have most of us. Haven't had a lot of comfort already with anger. But and it certainly goes hand in hand with grief. If you have had a tremendous loss, you're going to be angry at some point and many points and whatever. But there is that question, and there's a whole chapter on why am I so angry? And I thought it might be interesting. I mean, obviously, part of the reason you're angry is because something, so important to your heart has been taken from you.
yeah,
So
the
obviously
injustice.
you're going to be
Yeah.
angry, but I was wondering if you could speak to like the neurochemical piece of that as well.
Well, I think it goes back to what the brain does in
Mhm.
response to trauma. So I actually think, and this is coming from someone who I was raised with zero anger. I spent a lot of time in therapy touching and getting to know my anger, and I'm great with anger. I love anger. I am irrationally angry in appropriate ways with people who are dear to me, and I can say, like, I know this is petty, or I know this is bad, or that, this is how I feel about this, and I think they did it this way. And even though a part of me is like, Megan, no one would do that. That's not real. I keep that contained, and then I move through it, and then I respond to whatever made me angry with some anger. I
Yeah.
don't respond from a place of anger, but I always acknowledge that the anger is there. I'm frustrated, I'm disappointed, I'm angry. It's in there. So I feel good about my capacity to tell the truth. I think anger is an honest emotion. I think
Yeah.
it can be a real tool. What I think happens when we're grieving is that we are in this state, again, that window of what we can tolerate. Like, think about when you're driving home in traffic and you're like whistling to Mariah Carey, and, it's annoying, but like you're fine. And then the next day, same amount of traffic, and you want to drive your car off the road. It's not about the traffic, it's about whatever's going on inside your system. And so grief, particularly sudden, profound loss, puts so much energy inside your system
Yeah.
that you're like short circuiting. And I think anger is a fight response. I am
Yeah,
fighting
definitely.
against you and what you're saying, and this reality, and the fact that I have to integrate this and this new life that I absolutely don't want. And I think the fight response is good for us. So when a client comes in and they're angry, when I'm talking to a friend and they're pissed, I feel safer and more okay in that than I would if they said nothing.
Yeah.
Than
Yeah,
I
that
would,
makes sense.
right?
But what about and this isn't making anger wrong, because I agree that anger is definitely our friend, but I do see a lot of people not only lashing out, but avoiding their sadness.
Yeah.
So staying accidentally stuck
Yeah.
because they're so, and this isn't conscious, but they're so like uncomfortable and afraid of the depth of their grief and their sadness.
100%.
Anger is a lot more empowering, a lot more activating, and for many, a lot less scary than profound sadness. So often, what is underneath the anger is the profound sadness. And I
Yeah.
always think about that when I see someone in the supermarket or on the street or whatever, like
Yeah.
raging. I think, God,
Yeah.
there must be something really soft and sad underneath there for them to be.
Totally.
But I do think that people often stay stuck in anger so that they don't have to feel the sadness.
Yeah. No, I think you're totally right. And in IFS therapy, we would talk about this as a part, right? There's this
Internal
part.
family systems, that is.
Yes. Yeah. That it's, and everybody knows this from the movie Inside Out, but the idea that like anger comes in to protect you,
Yeah.
and it's protecting the part of you that is devastated.
Yeah.
And that actually your brain has sort of done an assessment, like, I can be angry. I know how to do that. That's not going to destroy me. But this sadness that I have might, because I've never done that before, because this is the first time I've lost a child, and I'm not really sure I'm going to survive it. I mean, that's what most grievers say about profound loss. Like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I don't think I'm going
Yeah.
to survive
Yeah.
it. Right. And so I hear what you're saying, which is like that angry part is usually a cover story, right? It's like
Yeah.
the look over here, the tap dancer to distract you from this sadness. What I talk to folks about as a trauma therapist, because a lot of them will come in with some judgment, like, I should be talking about my sadness, but I'm just so angry. We want to bring them to an awareness, right? So like bring you to the insight that often when you're angry, it's a good question to wonder.
Yeah.
Is it maybe sadness that's being protected? Like, just basic education about that. But also what I say to grievers is, well, maybe being angry is pretty wise right now.
Yeah.
Maybe what your system can handle is telling everybody to fuck off and pushing people away, which, yes, you know what? That's not a great outcome. But maybe if you were to go near that deep sadness, that would be more than you can handle at this moment. And that would be a more negative outcome.
Mm.
So when I'm working with people in therapy, and this is often sort of a constellation and a story is I'm trying to get them to just like do 2% less of the anger and 2% more of the sadness. So that because anything that you experience, right? I don't know that I can jump out of an airplane until I jump out of an airplane. And then when I've done it, I'm like, well, that's something I can do. But to get myself to jump out of an airplane, I mean, that could take, that could take months of preparation. In this work, I think it's the same, which is being able to say, like, I know you need your anger. I get it. But also, can we dial 2% down and dial up maybe the sadness so we can just touch it? Because without the skill set, without the tools, we've built this curriculum that really is designed to help people every day to just have some bites, some little morsels of anger. I mean, little morsels of grief that might include anger. We're trying to help you sort of navigate how you're going to build the muscles to carry the loss. And we're doing that by having it be a daily practice. So one of the prompts often is, where do I feel energy in my body? How would I identify that energy, right? And so if somebody
starting to really understand what you're feeling when. We
Yeah.
actually this weekend, I have these grieving mama meetups once a month, and we're having a special field trip to the rage room. And we're going to beat the crap out of cars and plates. And, what I have found almost every time is when we move that anger, not only does it, increase the dopamine levels and, create this huge release, but I am also anticipating that there's going to be a lot of tears. I mean, every time I move big anger,
breaks through. Yeah.
the tears break through. I also find, and I came upon this, I share this in the podcast the latest Sammy update that I did a few months, I guess it was in April or May that I did of 2024. So not too long ago, an episode kind of updating about Sammy. And I shared some of the things I haven't really shared before about the early days after he died. And I've shared this with you, Megan, but I went through this whole series of metaphysical crazy things that happened. I was led to basically leave my family a week after he died and go into the redwoods. And I was instructed that I had to go all the way into my grief or I was going to die. This is what this voice told me. You can listen to the podcast to hear the story. And I was scared shitless of doing that. But what I discovered when I did is, and this is why I think a lot of people aren't willing to go, and me too at the time, to go all the way in and to let ourselves feel, is that we feel like there's not going to be a bottom.
Yeah, 100%. That's what everybody says.
But there is a bottom. There is a bottom when you let yourself feel it. And of course, you need support to know how to re-regulate yourself and how to resource yourself. Not because you'll be a puddle on the floor for the rest of your life, but just for your nervous system's sake.
Yeah.
But I do think that in some ways, we definitely have to create those guardrails and make sure people have support. But I feel like we're a little too scared of going into the pain.
Yeah.
And that it's actually by going into the pain that we are fully set free.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the neuroscience things that I teach people, which again, this is not a truism. Like even a rage room is not a truism, or cold plunging is not a truism, or therapy is not a truism. Nothing works perfectly for any one griever. We just give a million examples of things that help in grief. And the one that seems like it would be possible or appealing to you, that's the one you start with. But what we teach people is you have a vagus nerve. The vagus nerve's job is to turn on and send out a whole series of distress signals, which essentially sedates the body. It's the nerve that fully develops around 4 months, which is why babies can cry out they're sleeping. They cry so loud that the vagus nerve turns on and sends in all this dopamine and all these neurochemicals, and it makes the baby kind of stoned and then falls asleep. So when people are doing those cold plunges and they're feeling stoned, that's your vagal response.
Yeah.
And so when you want to sort of tone out the system and come and soothe, but it's what I say to people. I know you think you're going to cry and never stop, but you have this thing called a vagus nerve.
Yes.
And what's going to happen is you're going to cry so hard that it's going to wake up, turn on, and make you fall asleep.
I know. I love it. I love it. And it also raises your frequency, I think. I've noticed.
It does.
All right. So we could talk about this for hours. We've talked about it for an hour.
We have. I
Okay.
know.
Is there
You and I are in the
anything,
same.
is there anything you want, I mean, obviously we're going to put the book and any other resources you want us to share in the show notes. But is there anything you want to share just in closing that I haven't asked you about that is you think is important for us to
Well,
know?
one of the things that I really, because I knew your story before I knew you, which I imagine is true for lots of people who are listening. One of the things that I think has been like a beautiful piece of learning to me, even what you just said about going to the redwoods, is that we are instinctively wired to figure out how to grieve.
Yeah.
And so that even if we didn't sit here and give people the benefit of all of this education, I think people find their way to their own grief process. And for some people, that's going to be the redwoods. And for other people, that's going to be starting a foundation. And for other people, I wrote 3 books in my grief. There's no right way, but to trust that the energy is going to move and do something, and that you will learn from yourself in a way that's not conscious.
Yeah.
And to allow that, maybe, that's really at the heart of can anyone tell me, is sort of like, look, we can do this.
Yeah.
And I want people to find hope in that, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know how anyone couldn't find it hopeful that we are on a pod. I checked myself into a mental health hospital because I was so ill after my mom died. You have shared so openly what the impact of Sammy's death was and continues to be.
Yeah.
I really want people to know that we're not here to tell people what to do. We're just here to sort of extend a hand and say, I know it's impossible. When people say to me, I can't do it, I'm like, I know you can't. I absolutely know you can. And I know you will, because somehow we all fucking do it.
We do.
So that, come to my Instagram account. I'm always teaching classes. This year is going to be a big year. We're doing things at Crapalo and Omega, and I'm teaching in the Cape Cod Institute in the summer. There are going to be so many opportunities to sit in conversation with me. And that's what I want. I want people who, want a high touch experience of learning.
Yeah.
And on my website, you can just sign up and you'll get all the letters and all those things. We really rely on hearing from other people. Our entire curriculum, the Grief Mentor Method, is built off of things that people told us help them in their grief. And every time we teach it, just recently we taught it and somebody said, my meditation is riding my motorcycle. I've never been on a motorcycle. But as soon as they said it, I was like, oh, I'll add that to the list. Yeah, it's totally meditative. Yeah, thanks. And so then we just keep expanding what we define as sort of the capacities that are part of our grief practices. And grief is part of our everyday experience. It is, whether or not we identify it as such or not. But imagine if we lived in a culture where everybody was like, oh, well, I spent 30 minutes grieving this morning, and then I went to the gym, and then just imagine if people were able to not only identify the energy in their life, but also describe how they attended to it. That's my dream.
Yeah. Amen.
Right?
I have that dream too.
Yes.
So we'll put all of that, your social media stuff, your website, the book link. We'll put all of that in the show notes, guys. Thank you, Meghan, for
Oh
all
my
the
gosh.
work you're doing in the world and for coming on.
I'm so grateful to you and the invitation to come on here and this conversation. I know you and I we're gonna keep up this conversation both for our platforms, but also just for us. And I know we're gonna do some stuff together in the future, and I can't wait.
Thanks for listening and crying out loud with me. If something you heard today helped or made you feel less alone, please follow, share, and review. And for more tools and a community that deeply understands you and your pain, visit the Grief Healing Collective at drlauraberman.com/grief healing. I'll see you next time on Crying Out Loud.
There's a hollow in my chest where your laughter used to be. Space at every table, an empty seat I see. The woman I was before you left didn't make it through, but love is still alive in me and still there between us two. They say just let it be alright. Just keep your pain inside. But love this deep and pain this true were never meant to hide. So I'm crying out loud, I'm not holding it in, not shrinking my heart or the shape I am in. If grief is the echo of love that resounds, then I will love you crying out loud. Ooh. Some days grief's a tsunami, some days it's just a wave, some days I'm barely breathing, some days I feel so brave. But I am learning slowly what the breaking's about. The only way to freedom is feeling it out. Every tear that hits the ground is not a sign I'm weak. It's the sound of love still reaching, still learning how to speak. So I'm crying out loud, let the whole world see. Love didn't leave, it's alive in me, and the dark's a doorway. If you let it be found, we don't heal by hiding, we heal crying out loud. What if the ache is holy? What if the wound's the door? What if the heart that's shattered can love even more? I'm softer in the tender places, fiercer where I stand. Grief didn't end my story, remade who I am. So I'm crying out loud when my hands unbound, not apologizing for the tears I found. If this is the cost of a love so proud, then I will live and I